Because I am the self-help addict, right? I'm the classical case of a self-help addict. I've read hundreds of books. I've highlighted them, been to webinars and seminars, and you go online and you take the course, and of course you don't do anything. I've done all that. Been there, done that, wore the t-shirt, bought the t-shirt.
Do you want to earn more? Work less and enjoy what you do each day. It's no secret, it can be done. This podcast with Dr. T will not only educate and inspire you, it will also teach you how to do more and be more with the time you already have. It will be like a shot of adrenaline straight into the heart of your business. Here is your host, Tyson Franklin.
Hi, I'm Tyson Franklin and welcome to this week's episode of It's No Secret with Dr. T. Now, my guest is all the way from Israel. His name is Daniel Gefen. He is the host of a podcast called The Daniel Gefen Show, and he's also the author of a book called The Self-Help Addict, which is what I want to talk about today. So, Daniel, how are you doing?
I'm doing awesome. How are you doing, Tyson?
I'm fantastic, Daniel, and this is what I like about podcasting is you can be on different sides of the world, yet you can connect so easily.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And my podcast show, my original podcast called Can I Pick Your Brain? I've met some very interesting people from all sorts of walks of life, from all over the world, from different industries. So it's been absolutely incredible.
So, yeah, that podcast itself, Can I Pick Your Brain? What was that? What was the emphasis on that show? And why did you switch from that to the Daniel Gefen Show? Or you're still doing both at the moment?
I'm doing both. I love podcasts so much that I've now got two. Couldn't get enough of it. How it starts is actually really interesting. Basically, what happened was somebody invited me onto their podcast.
Yeah.
And it was the first time I ever heard the word podcast. So I remember kind of, I was a bit embarrassed to ask, but I was like, what's a podcast? And they said, oh, it's like radio, except it's, online. And I thought, wow, that's really cool. I've never done that before. And so I agreed to go on the show. And the next thing I know, I'm, talking about my backstory and it's amazing. Like I literally fell in love with speaking in front of a microphone. And at the end, I said to the guy, I said, how do I do this? I want my own show. This is amazing. And so he ended up teaching me exactly what I needed to do. And within 2 weeks, I had my first episode 0, which I recorded, by the way, 18 times because I kept messing up. I was like, hey, this is Daniel Gefen and crap, it's like, oh man, I had to keep re-recording. And then finally on the 18th go, I just said, do you know what? I'm just going to record it. And I don't care what happens during this recording. I'm hitting publish. Like I'm just going to hit the publish button. Enough. And so I recorded it and I hit publish and I just was like, okay, done. That was about 3 years ago. Today, I've got over 135 episodes. I've interviewed billionaires. I've interviewed New York Times bestselling authors. I interviewed the smartest man alive, the leading hostage negotiator for the FBI.
Who's the smartest man alive?
Smartest man alive was a guy called Walter O'Brien who hacked into NASA when he was 13 years old from his bedroom and stole the blueprints for the space shuttle.
That's pretty cool.
Crazy story.
And then you said you had someone from the FBI?
I had the leading hostage negotiator from the FBI who basically talked about his negotiation with bank robbers and how to learn how to negotiate in business. So that was really interesting.
And this was all for your Pick Your Brain podcast.
It's called Can I Pick Your Brain?
Yeah.
And that's been going now for 3 years. It's a weekly show. It's once a week. It's about 45 minutes to an hour. Because I go really deep into with the guests, I go really deep into their backstory and their topic, and essentially I'm kind of reverse engineering their journey and how they got to where they are today. And then the Daniel Gefen Show is an interesting story, how that started. Basically, I've got a slight case of bipolar, which means that I have very high highs and very low lows. So when I'm excited, I'm like really excited, right? And my wife has to keep me from, jumping out the windows and going crazy, kind of like my kids. I have 4 little children, so I'm like the 5th child. But then when I'm down, I'm really down, like down in the dumps, and there's no trigger for it. There's no reason. It's not that I've had a bad month in business or that something happened. Like nothing needs to trigger. It just happens, where I just feel in a slump. The other symptom, or the other, another thing that people who have, not ADD, bipolar, is that we tend to need to talk things out to ourselves. So what I found myself doing was I would wake up in the morning and I'd have thousands of thoughts in my head, because basically as an entrepreneur, for those of you listening to this, if you're an entrepreneur and you're creative, right? So usually you have loads of ideas swimming around in your head. And so I go to bed at night with these ideas still swimming around, and then when I go to sleep, those ideas don't disappear. They're still there. They're just waiting to be expressed, right?
Yeah.
They're accumulating. And so when I wake up in the morning, I just get bombarded with all of these thoughts. And so what I would do is I would go for a walk outside in the park near my home, and I would just talk out these thoughts because I need to speak them. I need to hear them in order to internalize them. And so what I would do is I would plug in my headphones into my phone, so people in the park would think that I'm talking on the phone, so they wouldn't think I'm crazy and put me in a mental home. So that's what I did. And about a couple of weeks ago, I had this idea. It was a crazy idea. I said to myself, why don't I record these sessions that I have with myself, right? Because some of them are really, really good, right?
Yeah.
I get really deep. I start thinking about things. And I remember on a number of occasions where I said, oh my goodness, I wish that was like on a stage or like on a podcast show, because that was really, the way I spoke that out and the idea was so important. And I think people should hear that. And so then I said to myself, but Daniel, like, who wants to listen to some guy talking to himself in the park? Like, that's ridiculous. And then my other voice said, well, what have you got to lose? Just hit record and see what happens. Just record a couple of days and see, And so for the next couple of days, I would go to the park and I would hit record and I would start talking to myself for about 10 to 15 minutes. And then I told my wife, hey, I've got some of these recordings. Do you want to hear them? And so she listened to them and she said, wow, these are really good. And I said, are you sure? She said, yeah. I said, okay, well, because I'm thinking of doing a podcast out of this. She's like, yeah, you should definitely do it. And then I thought to myself, but hold on, I'm sitting normally in a studio like I am right now, right?
Yeah.
The reason I sound, polished is because I've got a professional microphone, I've got a pop filter, I've got, a studio that's soundproof, right? So it all sounds very nice and very polished. But if I'm walking in the park with my cell phone and a pair of headphones, you're going to hear the wind, you're going to hear the birds chirping, you might hear the odd, lawnmower, the guys mowing the lawn in the park. That's not going to sound very professional. Then I decided, you know what? I think that people are not going to care. There are people who are going to want the content and they're not going to care about how pretty it looks or how, polished it sounds. So people don't care about the perfect product. What they care about is they just want the content to be good, right? That's the key. And this is what I've learned over the years, and it's why I've written a book called The Self-Help Addict, is because it's all about how, most of my life I spent so much of my time overthinking and overanalyzing and trying to perfect everything, and waiting for that right time and waiting for, the right moment and waiting for the right resources to actually take action. And in the end, I end up overwhelmed. I end up, basically what I like to call, I guess, what's the word? When your brain is overweight, we have physical obesity. And another thing I talk about is emotional obesity.
Oh, yeah. No, I totally understand that. Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? So we get emotionally obese because we overload, and we have information obesity where we overload our brains with information. And we sit on YouTube for like hours trying to, I remember one time I was taking videos and I wanted to make the perfect video. So I went on YouTube and I typed in, how to create great videos. And I'm sitting there for 2 hours, literally binge watching videos on how to create videos. And then eventually I'm like, Daniel, for crying out loud, just put the phone in front of your face and take a video. No one cares as long as it's good, right? As long as it's, as long as what you're saying is valuable, nobody cares that much about everything else.
I think you're absolutely spot on there. I think the only difference is if you're telling people it's perfect and it's not, then people go, well, I think you missed the mark. But when you're not saying it's perfect, then say, because like your new show, the Daniel Gefen show, when I listened to it, you were walking in the park, I could hear the wind, and I think there was someone mowing their lawn. But but now that you explain it to me, I'm thinking, okay, that whole podcast made sense now, because I hadn't listened to episode 1. I didn't hear any explanation about it, but I knew you were walking in the park. But the content you shared was really, really good. So it wasn't as though you were saying to me, I have the best produced podcast in the world. That's not what you were saying. So I reckon that makes sense. You just got to live up to I think it's just being real.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, 100%. And this applies to everything. Writing a book. People are afraid that, if I hit the publish button, maybe people are going to find the grammatical errors and spelling mistakes and who knows what else. And if you live like that, you'll just never get anything done. You just got to hit publish. You got to just keep hitting publish, and you can always. What's amazing is that we live in a world right now where everything can be edited.
Yeah.
Pretty much almost everything can be edited. There's nothing that is set in stone. Back in the day, you would write something down and there was no way to edit it. Now you can edit. You put a book up on Amazon and literally you could just go in and edit it, no problem, and update it. You record a podcast and you could go back and edit out something you said that you didn't like, or you can. I know people who they edit out all the ums and ahs and awkward silences, and there you might want to edit that out, right?
Yeah.
I'll
be all right.
Let's. I personally don't care, because to be honest with you, between me and you, Tyson, and everyone listening to this, I don't think people really care that much about if someone says or if there's a little slight awkward silence. I think that makes us human, and I think that makes us a little bit more. They can relate to us more.
I think if it fits in the conversation, if it just sounds like a real conversation, it's not a problem. Like I know when I talk on my podcast, I do sometimes have pauses in between me talking. When I do my editing, where I take out the pauses the most is if I'm talking to someone overseas and then I stop talking, and by the time they start talking, sometimes there is that gap. There's that lag, that lag time. Doesn't always happen, but sometimes it does.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there are certain things that you may want to edit out because it might be annoying for the listener. But I just think for the most part, if you go to a bar and you have a conversation with someone at the bar, you're not going to edit out the ums and ahs and the site that it's just a normal conversation.
Yeah, that's true. I had a podcast I recorded just recently that's already out there for the whole world to listen to, is about cryptocurrencies. And the guest that I had, it's the first one, I went on site to their business. We're 5 minutes into the conversation, and the Coranda train goes past. Now it's an old steam train, so all of a sudden you can hear chugga 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 as it went past their building, and I went, oh, that was so cool. That added to the atmosphere.
Yeah, absolutely. On one of my reviews for the Daniel Gefen show, I have someone who wrote, Daniel, I love your show, and I even love the birds chirping in the background. It's quite funny how what I thought might be annoying to people, to some people, it adds to the atmosphere, makes it more real.
And I'm sure some people would find it annoying, but are they really the people that you want listening to your podcast? It's just like any business that you have. If you try and please everybody, you'll end up pleasing nobody. So there's always going to be that target market that are going to like chirping birds, noises in the background, imperfections, and it sort of makes it for them, if that makes it feel real. But there's going to be other people who I mentioned before that when it comes to sound, if it doesn't sound like it was recorded in the Rolling Stones studio, they're not interested.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting, Tyson, is that I always talk about the 3 types of people. So you've got the people who love what you do,
Yeah.
and they love your personality. They love everything about you, right? And every time you've put out a podcast or a book, or you come out with a course or whatever it is, they love your stuff and they follow you, and they always looking forward to more, things from you, emails, whatever it is.
They're like your raving
And
fans.
they're exactly your
Yeah.
raving fans, right? Then you've got your haters, which that you've kind of made, you've kind of made it, and you've put yourself out there when you get your first haters, right? So it's a cause for celebration, and those are the people that are always kind of wanting to put you down.
Yeah.
So they'll say something like, who do you think you are that you could talk about this? Or, oh, you think you're bipolar. You don't even know what bipolar is because, my brother has you always have people who will always have something to say against what you're saying. And then you've got the third group, who are basically the people who just don't care. They don't care either way. They've got nothing. They've got no opinion of you, right? So my philosophy is you want to focus on that first group.
Yeah.
And everything you do, when you're writing your book, when you're recording your podcast, when you're, recording a video, or when you're creating an ad, whatever it is, it's always got to be focused on that group, the first group, the people who love what you do. You want to be talking to them. The haters, you just ignore them. They're just, waste of time, waste of emotional energy. And the people who don't care, then they don't care, so it doesn't matter. I'm going to give an example that's obviously a bit of a trigger, but I use this because it's a perfect example. But Donald Trump, nobody's sitting on the fence with Donald Trump, right? President Trump,
that's true.
Nobody's sitting on the fence. You either love him or you hate him. It's very simple. You belong to two camps. And actually what I found is that if you want to know if you're being really successful at what you do,
yeah,
then you've got either lovers or haters, but you don't have people in the middle. The less people you have on the fence, right? Think about it. The less people you have on the fence, the more it shows that you're doing the right thing. Because when you're too much like Marmite, when you're not like Marmite, when you're too vanilla, right? Then you could have a whole mass amount of people who they don't have an opinion of you.
True.
And that's the worst thing. The worst thing is for most people to just not have an opinion. I like the fact that there are people who either will say they love me and they love what I do, or there are people who will be like, oh, that guy is so annoying. What an arrogant ass. I would much prefer that than just everyone's like, yeah, he's all right. He's all right. He's all right. Who wants to just be all right? You know what I'm saying? Like, no. Right.
You know what it reminds me of? When like actors, for example, you've got certain actors, like say Tom Cruise, and people either like him or don't like him. But then you've got those actors that are in 100 movies and no one really has an opinion of them. And that's probably why they've never become a superstar, because no one either likes or dislikes them.
Right. Yeah, 100%. I sent out an email recently to about 3,000 people. And, I got a bunch of people coming back going, oh, man, I love it, Dan. I love your emails, and, positive feedback. And I had a bunch of people who were like, don't send me these emails. I hate the way you send these emails, blah, 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 and that's great. That's wonderful. I don't want to send emails and then nobody responds because everybody's just like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
I think it's so key, and this is it. Well, people are scared to put themselves out there because they're scared of the feedback. But actually, you should embrace that feedback. You should be looking forward to that kind of feedback, because imagine for a second, right? If somebody has taken the time to send you an email or to write to you saying, I hate you, like, that's amazing. Like, bravo, because means you've done something. It means that you've got someone to take action. And in this world where everybody's got ADD and everyone's kind of, got so much going on in their life, if they've taken the time to actually talk to you and respond to what you're doing, you've done something right, even if it's negative, right?
Yeah, this is such good information that I think everybody needs to take on board.
Yeah, absolutely. If you don't ask, you don't get. If you don't put yourself out there, you won't impact anybody. You got it. That's just how it is. I actually think that people who don't take action, they're just spectators of life.
Yeah.
And, that's what my book, The Self-Help Addict, is all about, is do you want to be a spectator of life, or do you want to play the game, right? Do you want to watch everybody else playing, or do you want to play, right? You want to die, basically having just watched life go by, or do you want to grab life by the balls, so to speak, and make something happen? The only difference between someone at a Tony Robbins event, for example,
Yeah.
the only difference between someone in the crowd and Tony is that the person in the crowd bought the ticket and Tony's up there on stage. Tony's the one making the money because he's the one putting himself out there. He's the one who's standing up on the stage. Person in the crowd is bought the ticket and he's just, and people think, wow, but Tony Robbins is amazing. No, it's not. There's nothing that special. He's just decided to put himself out there over and over and over again.
Yeah, and what's funny, you mentioned Tony Robbins because he was in Cairns, where I live here, about 3 weeks ago. And I could have sworn somebody said it was here for, I don't know, it was called Date for Destiny or something like that. It was on for a week, and it was something like $5,000 or $6,000 for a ticket. And there were thousands of people at this event. And I sat back just amazed that many people. Now, the town, 3 weeks later, seems exactly the same. Nothing. I haven't seen any major changes over the last 3 weeks.
Don't expect it.
No, but and I know because in part of your book it actually says that self-doubt, procrastination, and indecision sort of creates a cycle of like self-help addiction. And I know a lot of people that are addicted to self-help.
Yeah, it's a plague. It's definitely it's an epidemic. I don't think there's many people talking about it.
I think people are starting to talk about it. Like a friend in America, Mark Menard, and he's got the shits at the moment about people who are out there pushing out these different causes and doing different things, but they've really got nothing backing it up.
Yeah.
And okay, at least I suppose they are out there taking action, but there's also having some content behind the action that they're taking. They're saying they're experts in certain things, but they're not actually experts. And then they're probably attracting the people who are addicted to self-help.
Oh, absolutely. There's a huge, massive market. I mean, think about it. 90% of the world, maybe even more, maybe 98% of the world are reactive and not proactive, right? Yeah. Most people are reactive. Most people are buyers. They're not sellers. Most people are consumers, not creators. There's very few in comparison of creators compared to consumers.
Yeah, and I've heard Gary Vaynerchuk actually saying that. Just go out there and start creating stuff. Stop consuming stuff all the time.
Exactly, 100%. So to get practical, one of the things that I started doing was I made a rule for myself that when I read a book, I do it chapter by chapter. And what I do is I make sure that at the end of the chapter, I've got to take some sort of an action.
Okay.
And in fact, what also works for me really well is whenever I read a book, I always use a yellow highlighter, as I'm sure most self-help addicts do, right? We take out the yellow marker pen and we start marking everything in the book, right? It's amazing. This is amazing. That's amazing. Wow, it's incredible, right? And of course, you end up with a big yellow book at the end, and you haven't done anything,
True,
right? Other than mark pen the book. And so what I've started to do is when I marker pen something and I get an idea, and I get inspired to take some sort of an action, I stop, okay, and I put pause on the book, and I go out and I do something. I go and take action on that thing. So to give you another example is, how many times have you watched a movie and you were compelled to take some sort of an action, but then what happens is you just you don't take the action, and of course the feelings fade away.
Yeah.
So for me, I was watching a movie about a father and son. And basically, the father and son have this terrible breakup, and they don't speak to each other for years. And then at the end of the movie, of course, they get together, and it's an amazing, beautiful moment of father and son, getting back together, reuniting. And I was crying. I was actually, tearing watching this because I had not a very close relationship with my father growing up.
Yeah.
And in that moment, I wanted to give my father a call, right? Because we're emotionally charged, and when we're emotionally charged, we're compelled to take action. But the problem is so many of us, we just don't, and we say we'll do it after, we'll do it later. But of course, what happens is the music dies down, and then the movie ends, and your emotions, basically calm down, and you're back to normal again, and then you're just checking Facebook or getting on with your day, and you've lost that moment, the heat of the moment. You've lost it. It's cooled down. So what I tend to do now is when I find myself in the heat of the moment, when I'm emotionally charged, that's the best time to take action. And I'll pick up the phone and I'll make that phone call, or I'll send that email, or I'll do that. You know what I'm saying?
Did you ring your dad?
That particular time I didn't, but I learned from that. And because of writing my book, I really wrote my book for myself. And I said to myself, if anybody reads this, that'll be nice. But I'm really writing this for me, because I am the self-help addict, right? I'm the classical case of a self-help addict. I've read hundreds of books. I've highlighted them, been to webinars and seminars, and you go online and you take the course, and of course you don't do anything. I've done all that. Been there, done that, wore the t-shirt, bought the t-shirt, right?
Yeah.
And so I was actually at a seminar. This is while I was writing my book, and I actually wrote the chapter about taking action. And so, of course, I have to swallow my own medicine, right? If I've got to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. So I'm in the seminar, and the person's talking about relationships, and he's talking about father and son relationships. And of course, I got all emotional about it. And as soon as I left the seminar, when I was driving home, I picked up my phone. I called my dad, and he picks up the phone. And just to give you a little bit of context, my father's father was a Holocaust survivor.
Yeah.
He was actually shot and buried alive in the Holocaust, and he watched his whole family getting murdered in front of him, and he pretended to be dead, and then he escaped. And he was left with nothing. I mean, nothing, absolutely nothing. And then he had to rebuild himself. But of course, emotionally, you can imagine somebody going through the most unbelievable, just I can't even. There's no words to describe what he went through. But somebody like that is completely emotionally scarred. And so my father grew up with a father that was, obviously emotionally challenged, and then his mother also passed away when he was about 14 years old. His mother drowned in the lake. So he really grew up without sort of any emotional support. So I understood my father. I understood that he wasn't able to sort of give that emotion. But I called him up and I said, look, hi, Dad, I just want to let you know, first of all, I love you, and that I wouldn't want to replace you with anyone else. And I know that you've, growing up, you tried to give me in terms of physical, material things. But I want you to know that, all of those things, they don't mean anything to me. All I really wanted was for you to just, tell me you love me. And I would, it would mean the world to me if you just called me up one time just to tell me that.
Yeah.
And he turned around to me and he said, how hard that is for me. I can't do that. It's really difficult for me, and he tried to change the subject. You know how it goes, right? And I said, look, I believe in you, and I believe that you can do it, and one day you will. And that was it. That was like the end of the conversation. I just wanted him to know that.
But it's good that you expressed how you felt, which was great.
Yeah. So a couple of days go by, and I remember the day very clearly. It was a Friday afternoon.
Yeah.
And I was playing tennis, and suddenly my phone rings, and it's my dad. Now, here's the thing. My dad only ever calls me for two reasons, usually. Either A, someone got married and there's a celebration in the family, or someone had a baby, or somebody's died.
Yeah.
Right. So there's two options. So of course, when I saw the phone ringing and I see it's my dad, I got really scared. I got really nervous. My heart started beating because, I forgot about the conversation I had a couple of days ago, and all I could think in my head was, is something wrong? Did someone die? Right. So I quickly ran to pick up the phone, and I pick up the phone, and he says, "I love you," and I almost dropped the phone. I literally just stood there with tears in my eyes, and that was a complete breakthrough. It was a complete breakthrough for me. It was a breakthrough for my dad. It changed our relationship. It opened it up, and just to think that had I not taken that action in the heat of the moment, had I allowed that feeling to just pass, and had I not called him up and not made that phone call, and all of you listening can imagine a time when you took an action, and imagine your life, how it would be today if you didn't take that action.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
If you didn't ask that person out, who ended up becoming your spouse. Imagine, you didn't take that action, right? And there's so many examples of that in our lives.
Yeah, I've had the same, not like that, but I know a friend of mine who I was quite close with. One of the things, where you move to different towns and you sort of just lose contact. And it was a similar thing where we were either watching a movie or a TV show, and it said, pick up the phone and ring somebody that you have not spoken to in years who is a really, really close friend. So I did. I picked up the phone, I rang, went to the answering machine, I left a message, and 3 weeks later I get a phone call from his wife, and he died. And she said, for the last 3 weeks, he kept saying, I've got to ring Tyson back. I've got to ring Tyson back. And
Whoa.
And we never spoke. And that he was only 42 when he died, and it was a real shock to the system. But it made me realize too that the people that you're closest to, if you haven't spoken to them for a while, it's just go and pick up the phone. Pick up the phone and make contact with them. And even if it's only for 60 seconds, just like you're saying, just take some action.
Mm. Why do you think that in infomercials and marketing and people that they'll always say, click that button, right, or call this number, and they repeat it over and over again? The reason why they do that is because they've done studies, and they've seen that people don't take action unless you really keep telling them to do it, right? By default, even if you watch an advert that's a great product and you actually need the product and you're thinking about buying the product, but if they don't tell you, press that button or pick up the phone or do that action several times, if they don't tell you that, most people just don't take action.
So with your book, so even though your book, it's talking about how people are addicted to self-help. So would you class your book as a self-help book, or it's not really a self-help book? It's a great
question.
Yeah, I thought that because I wrote that down. I went after I read the title and I read a bit about the book. I went, but this is then like a self-help book.
Exactly. And what's interesting is I was going to originally call the subtitle "The Last Self-Help Book You'll Ever Read," right?
Yeah.
So the Self-Help Addict, the last self-help book you'll ever read. But I changed that because what I came to realize is actually that's not my goal, and actually that would be wrong. And in the disclaimer to the book, I write that I'm not telling people not to read self-help books. I'm not telling people not to go to Tony Robbins, seminars. I'm not saying don't take courses.
Yeah.
I'm not saying don't listen to podcast shows and watch YouTube videos. I'm saying absolutely the information is amazing, but information alone is worthless. And you've got to if you don't take action on it, it, then it is worthless. But if you take action on it, then it's gold. And here's the thing. If you become an action taker, if you become a creator, then actually the fuel that you take in, meaning the YouTube videos, the inspiration, the information that you take in, you start to turn that information and use it as fuel, and that becomes very, very powerful. And so it shouldn't be the last self-help book you should ever read, but it should be the last self-help book you read that you don't take any action on. That's the key.
Yeah, and that's what I got out of it. The way that I looked at it was, no, you're not saying don't read self-help books. You're actually saying if you're going to read them, like you said, take some action. And if you take action out of every single book you read and it's having a positive influence on your life, then just keep reading the books, or watching the videos and listening to podcasts.
Yeah, 100%. And some people might say, okay, why do I need to read the book? Because, ultimately, if the whole book's all about just take action, then what do I need to read the book, right? Well, the thing is, I touch upon a lot of things in the book. How to deal with your emotions, things like fear. How do you deal with doubt, self-doubt, haters? How do you deal with your thoughts and feelings? What do you do with them? Do you just ignore them? A lot of people think that you need to ignore your thoughts and feelings. A lot of people think that you need to, fight against your fears. And I actually flip it. I say, no, you're actually supposed to make friends with your fear. I actually talk about how fear is good for you. It's an ally, not an enemy.
Yeah.
And how you can use those thoughts and feelings to your advantage. And there's a lot of other things. I mean, another thing I talk about in the book as well is, the balancing act of being and becoming. Because when you start becoming a creator and you start to do and you start taking a lot of action and you start to actually achieve a lot of things in your life, you'll still have a huge gaping hole. There's this emptiness that you find almost more so than people who don't take action, because at least the people who don't take action, they've kind of got a good reason for not being too happy because, well, I haven't made millions of dollars yet, or I haven't done this yet, or there's hope. But if you notice, the people who commit suicide often are actually very, very big high achievers. Right? Recently, we had a couple, unfortunately, a couple of people who've taken their life, and they were very high achievers.
Yeah.
And so people think that, well, how can that be? I actually think it makes so much sense because they've climbed the proverbial mountain, and at the top of the mountain, there's still nothing there, and that's depressing, and so they jump off. The people at the bottom of the mountain, so to speak, they still have hope to go up the mountain and see what's there. And so I talk about the importance of balancing being and becoming. It's not just about becoming. It's also about, because we're not human becomings. We're not human doings. Essentially, at our core, we're human beings.
That is a really good point. So your book, people, it's available on your website, which would be danielgefen.com, I assume, and Amazon. So any place online that sells books, your book is going to be readily available.
Yeah, just type in the Self-Help Addict.
And I'll put links in the show notes anyway, so people can follow it through there. So Daniel, I have one final question for you, and I did give you some warning. It's my Monday morning tip question, and what it's based around is, you're just walking down the street in Israel, and someone bumps into you and says, "Oh, you're Daniel Gefen. I was listening to one of your podcasts." As I head into work and I sit down at my desk, what's the number one tip that you would give me that I should do first thing today when I get to work?
I tell you what works for me, and some of people listening to this will work really well for you, and some of you it may not. But I find that when I get into my office and before switching on my computer, before checking any emails or doing anything, I get out a piece of paper, and I know this sounds very old-fashioned.
No, I love pieces of paper.
Yeah, today's technology and all that, but I'll be honest, nothing for me is more effective as taking out my pad of paper and just writing down the 3 things that I want to get done today. And these 3 things are basically 3 things that if I do nothing else, but I just do these 3 things, I'll be happy with my day. So it doesn't matter whatever happens in the day. If I get these 3 things done, I've had a good day. And I write them down. And of course, throughout the day, whenever I find myself feeling a little bit unsure of what I'm doing, because we get lost. We kind of, we get lost in the world, in the online world, right? We get caught in Facebook web, and we get caught in the Instagram web and the LinkedIn web and email web, right? And so all I need to do is look down at my piece of paper and say, okay, what's the next thing I need to do? And I just and as I go along, I tick them off and I cross it out, which, by the way, feels incredible. Whenever I tick them off and cross them out, they just feels really good.
What's funny about that answer that you gave is I just recently interviewed Glenn Richards, who's on the Australian version of the Shark Tank. And
oh, nice.
I asked him, same question. And he said to me, when you sit at your desk, before you put your computer on, get out a piece of paper and write down the main things that you need to get done today. You've only got a limited amount of time and energy, and you need to be putting them into the things that are most important first. When you start knocking them all off, then turn your computer on and get stuck into it. So if it's come from the Shark Tank and it's coming from you, that must be a great tip for a Monday morning.
Brilliant.
And like you said, that's going to work for some people and it may not work for others. So Daniel, I want to thank you for being on It's No Secret with Dr. T. And just want to let people know that Daniel has 2 podcasts because he's an overachiever. One is the Daniel Gefen Show and the other one is Can I Pick Your Brain? And he's also the author of a book, The Self-Help Addict. And they can find you, Daniel, at danielgefen.com. That would be correct?
Yeah, danielgefen.com. Or, of course, if they're listening to this on an iPhone, if they go to the podcast search bar and they just type in the Daniel Gefen Show, they could just hit subscribe, and that would be a huge, I guess, thank you to me, or big help to me, I should say, because it's a new show, and of course, I want to try and get ranked high up on iTunes, and so every time I get a new subscriber, it bumps me up. So your little finger pressing on the subscribe button will help Daniel Gefen to get the Daniel Gefen Show to get a little bit higher up the rankings on iTunes. So I appreciate that.
And I reckon they should do that too, because like I said, I listen to it and I get to hear birds chirping and lawnmowers in the background, and it actually felt like I was walking with you. And at the time, I was actually walking through a park myself on my daily walk. So, it's actually a great show to listen to while you're walking because they're not overly long either. And the thoughts going through your head were very similar to the thoughts that were going through my own head. So, and I have done the same thing where I put headphones on and I just record what's going on. I think more people should do that. So, Daniel, once again, thank you for being on It's No Secret with Dr. T. I've enjoyed this, and once again, it's felt like a personal therapy session for myself.
Thank you, Tyson. I really appreciate it, and thank you for everyone who's still listening to this.
Oh, don't worry. I'm sure there's plenty of people listening right to the end. Well, I hope you got something out of this today with Daniel, and I'd be surprised if you didn't. And I know we covered so much in such a short period of time, but there's 3 things that really, I think, need repeating again. One was, don't wait for everything to be perfect before you get started. Just get started, get better as you go along. The other part was, just make sure you take action. It's fine to be reading, it's fine to be listening to podcasts, going to seminars, but don't just consume and do nothing, because the emotions you feel when you're first taking in that information needs to be acted upon straight away. If you wait too long, you will actually lose it. And the third thing that I think is really worth mentioning again is don't be afraid of getting feedback. And even if you're getting negative feedback, at least you're getting feedback. It's when you get nothing back that means you may not be doing anything. And as you said, the less people you have sitting on the fence means you're actually doing something right. And I hope everybody listening to this podcast episode today, as soon as you press stop and you're finished, you hop out of your car, you go and take some action, even if it's just one thing that you go and do today. So tomorrow you can look back and go, you know what, that podcast I listened to made this change in my life. So my guest next week is a personal friend of mine, Jalinda Stella, and she is a personal stylist. Now, we haven't had anyone talking about style, colour or fashion on this show, but it's really important and it communicates a specific message about you and your business. Here's a little snippet of what Jalinda's going to talk about next week.
I do think that when you initially go into your business, it's really important to create that brand and definitely choose colours, not because you've chosen them in your logo, but because they actually do enhance your skin. I often go into, I don't want to name places, but into, say, a doctor's office, and mustard in particular is a really hard colour for a lot of people to wear. It can actually make their skin look ill. And the amount of doctor's surgeries, and I think, why are you making your staff look sick?
This was a really fun conversation with Jalinda, and we did have a lot of laughs from start all the way through to the end. And I probably did say a couple of things that are inappropriate, which, I don't know. I'll leave it up to you to decide whether they were or not. Now, if you have any thoughts after listening to this particular episode, like I always say, I'd love to hear from you. You can leave a comment on my website, tysonfranklin.com, or you can just reach me on Facebook and LinkedIn. Just look for Tyson E. Franklin. And finally, like I always say, if you're enjoying the podcast, share it with your friends, family, work, colleagues. And if you happen to be on iTunes or your favorite podcast platform, please, I'd love a review at some stage. Tell people what you think, and I will share it on all my social media as well. Okay, that's it from me. Take care of yourselves, look after your family, and I will talk to you again next week. Bye for now.